Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. Today we are going to be talking to someone who was a very early member of the MKB community, and now we are so happy to be supporting her as she has a book launch for her first book. It's a historical fiction. Hold on, and I'll get her on here to talk to you. So this is someone I have known for a long time, Brynn Barineau, and I first got to know her as a blogger. What it's like to change countries in the middle of the pandemic. There we are. Hello.
Hello, Anna. So nice to actually see you and talk to you.
Yes, I was just saying that we've actually known each other for a long time, but I believe this is the first time we've actually gotten to talk in person.
Yeah.
And the first time I've really had a chance to, I didn't even know that writing was an interest. I mean, of course, writing in terms of blogging, but I didn't know that you were interested in writing fiction. And so this is so exciting. And I also have to say, from an unbiased point of view, I mean, even if I didn't know you as a friend, I would just love this book. It was so much fun to read. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I love hearing that because I cannot say, as a debut author, there is a lot of imposter syndrome and anxiety, and you just like cross your fingers and hope. And of course, your mom says they love it. I mean, and your husband, and it's like, okay, but what about someone that I don't see at Thanksgiving? Will they be kind about it? So thank you so much. I love. And this always goes out. If you love an author's book, tell them. We are just a mess of anxiety. We always need the reinforcement.
Well, that's really good advice because I think a lot of people don't think about that. So whether it's leaving a review on Amazon or Goodreads, all of that really makes a difference. I mean, just to boost their confidence, but it also makes a difference to other people. So if you want to help out a new author, especially independent author, leave the reviews. That really does make a difference. But why don't we go ahead and jump in, because I know, we have a limited amount of time, and the name of the book is Jaguars Another Game. So tell us, how did you become an author? Was this something you had always had in the back of your mind, or?
Sure. So I was a lifelong reader. Like, I was the kid that brought chapter books on the beach vacation. And I remember our first family trip out west in California. Never been to California, and I'm in the car reading a book in the back seat, like not looking. They had to take my book away, like so I could actually see the trip that my parents were paying for. But I never thought I would be an author. That to me seemed crazy. It seemed like saying you wanted to be a professional singer or an actor or an astronaut. Like, nobody I knew actually wrote a whole novel and published it and like made money from it and saw it in bookstores. That was just a crazy thing to want to be. So less crazy, I was going to go work for the State Department, because that was less, being an ambassador was somehow in my mind less crazy than being an author. So I went to school in DC and I did international relations. I was not an English major. And then I ended up meeting my husband in DC, and he was from Brazil. And I ended up moving to Rio de Janeiro and lived in Brazil for 14 years. I became a teacher and was teaching, and I started writing as a way to process my culture shock and my adaptation in Brazil. And that is how we came to know each other. I found Multicultural Kid Blog when I had my daughter in Vitoria, Brazil in 2011. And that was a lot. And writing was an outlet for me, for sure. So I really started blogging and doing creative nonfiction about parenting in a culture not my own, parenting in a foreign country, in a foreign language, and all of the challenges and joys and triumphs that entails. So that is how I started writing regularly, like almost daily, certainly weekly, and putting stuff out for other people to read. And that was the confidence boost I think I needed, like getting good feedback on the blog, finding a community of other writers and other moms who wanted to write. And then that just led to, I had some ideas for fiction stories. I was like, well, maybe I can do fiction too. And I bought craft books. I went online and did online workshops, and I taught myself. I never took, I mean, other than some online workshops, mostly to learn how to query and learn the process of actually pursuing publication. I read a lot of craft books, I read a lot of fiction books, and I wrote creative nonfiction and that led to Jaguars Another Game. There's the book. Sorry, I love the cover. I think it's gorgeous. So I'm just going to like pop it up every few minutes there. Just the gorgeous cover. So that's how I got the book. That was the journey.
Well, I agree. It is a beautiful cover. And so I'm curious, so I can see how you got started in writing, but why did you decide to do historical fiction? And then why this time period? Why was this such kind of a rich time period? And we're talking the early 19th century. This is when the Portuguese court has relocated to Brazil, which I think a lot of people probably don't even know about. I mean, it is really surprising that a European court would relocate outside of Europe. But why did you decide to choose that time period, say, versus just doing contemporary fiction?
Initially, I did not choose historical fiction. The very first fiction book I ever wrote was actually a graphic novel, and it was and it was contemporary. I wrote the script for that. And then I wrote a dystopian YA set in the future. And so it wasn't the genre that came to me immediately. It was just the ideas. That's what I get hit by an idea that just I find fascinating. I can't let go of. I'm thinking about all the time. And I read, well, actually, I guess it started with Pirates of the Caribbean. I love a good sword fight. I love Princess Bride. I love Three Musketeers, Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was trying to think of what book I was writing next because the YA dystopian was clearly not going to sell. So I started thinking, well, Brazil must have pirates. They have a huge coast, a massive coast. There must have been pirates. Maybe I can do something historical with pirates in Brazil. And I read this book. I'm going to give a shout out here. 1808, The Flight of the Emperor by, let me see if I can, Laurentino Gomez, 1808, The Flight of the Emperor. So I read that. It's nonfiction, and it is about the Portuguese court fleeing Napoleon to Rio de Janeiro and arriving in 1808 in Rio. And it's the only time in history that a European court relocated to a colony and made the colony the heart of the empire. And they actually created the United Kingdom of Portugal and Brazil. And that blew my mind. I was like, because I studied international relations. I studied colonialism. I mean, for years at a collegiate level. And I was like, I have never heard of this. This is insane. They packed up 10,000 members of the Portuguese court and society and moved them all to Rio. And I was like, this is a novel. Like, for sure, this is a novel. Like, people have to know about this. This is just such a crazy time period. And so that is how I came to write historical fiction in 1808 Rio de Janeiro, because I just thought this was such a unique and incredible moment in history that no one, at least in the United States, learns about.
Yeah, definitely. And well, sometime I would love to learn more about your dystopian YA novel, because I have a kid who that is his lane, is dystopian fiction. But so I'm curious, so after you decided that there are just so many details in this book, for those that haven't read it yet, that I just wonder, how did you go about researching? I mean, just like all the details of the market and what was being sold and kind of what it looked and what it smelled like even, but also you have details about life in the palace. I mean, how did you go about researching all of that? And I also want to throw in, for those, I forgot to mention that we're also, this is our book of the month for the Global Reads for Grown-Ups book club for All Done Monkey, which is my other channel. And someone from that book club, Maria, she wanted to know, is it true about the prince and the chicken legs? If you haven't read it, this is the detail that the prince used to keep chicken legs and maybe even other chicken parts in his pockets so he could just snack on them whenever he wanted.
And Maria, that is 100% true. That's a true detail. I'm not creative enough, honestly, to give someone that quirk. It's true. And I got a lot of those details, like about the prince. There's a whole chapter in 1808. So the quirks about him keeping chicken legs and chicken breasts in his pockets, about not liking to bathe, having his clothes repaired on him while he was sleeping. Carlotta Joaquina, who loved to fire cannons and was just angry and like shouted, and it's all true. It's like, so those details about the royal family, for the most part, if there's a really unique quirk, that is true, because I'm not that creative. That's one of the benefits of historical fiction. If you do your research, you don't actually have to be that creative. And so that's all true. And I did a lot of reading. It helps if I can read in Portuguese. I certainly am not fluent in Portuguese, but I can read it. And so I was reading several primary sources. And very fortunately for me, there was a painter, Debray, who came with the Austrian court when the Prince Regent's son got married. An Austrian princess came over, and she brought with her a whole artistic ensemble. And this painter painted scenes of everyday life in Rio. And this was about 1819, 1820. So a little after my book is set, but it is just this massive book full of gorgeous paintings of daily street life. So unlike so many artists at the time who were painting royalty in very stuffy positions, members of court, Debray went to Rio and he painted the people on the streets. He painted what was happening in daily life. So when Isabel is walking through the streets, going to market and selling sweets, and she has a basket on her head, the people she's passing in the streets are from these paintings. Like, I just pulled the man with the chickens in the basket. I pulled the man selling garlic around his neck. The wealthy man suspended on a pole in a hammock, carried like through the streets, swinging in a hammock, from a painting. So I got a lot of those details through those wonderful, wonderful paintings. A lot of the sensory details, I was fortunate. I lived in Rio for years. So the heat, just the oppressive heat, like tactile, the sound of the bats at night going through the palm trees, like those were things that I heard and I experienced while living there. So I brought those in.
Yeah, that occurred to me because I was thinking, not just about someone who would have visited, but it seemed like a lot of those details. Obviously, you have those wonderful paintings to draw from, which I'm going to have to go look for that book. But also, it just really, you could tell that this was someone who had a lot of lived experience in Rio, even though, of course, it's changed over the past 200 years. But there's a lot about like the weather and the climate and the landscape that would be the same. And you could tell this was somebody who had lived there for a long time. And I just wanted to jump ahead and know, because you were showing the pictures and talking about the different scenes, and one of the things that struck me was about how you could, the way that you talk about race and class and gender, and especially going into the topic of slavery, it just seemed like it might be kind of like a balancing act. How did you decide how you were going to approach, especially slavery, but also just in general, because it's hard not to look at it with modern eyes, but at the same time, how did you really get into those, but also kind of keep it true to the time period? And especially the idea of having the three different voices was really clever, because you could kind of see it from different people's position and kind of opinion, I guess, on that.
So the three women, the three protagonists, I call them my tropical three musketeers. That's how I've always called them that. There's Maria, who is a free Black Brazilian, and there's Isabel, who is mixed race white Portuguese and Guarani. And then there's Victoria, who is white Portuguese from Lisbon, and she comes with the court. So Maria and Isabel are both Brazilian, born and raised in Rio. And Victoria comes to Rio as the court flees. And those three women are representative of the population of Rio at the time, which was about 2/3 people of color in 1808. So it was a very multicultural, multiracial, multilingual city by the turn of the 19th century. The Portuguese arrived in about 1500. And so there was 3 centuries of Portuguese immigration, bringing Africans as slaves over, and then all the different indigenous groups in Brazil. So for 3 centuries, there had been mixing, and 1808 Rio had a very complex racial hierarchy, more so than we have in the US. It was never binary. There are multiple layers, multiple categories, multiple groups. They had about 20 different terms for if you were the child of a white Brazilian and a black Brazilian, or a white Portuguese, because those were different, white Portuguese and black Brazilian, or Guarani and black Brazilian, or if your mother was half white, half black, and your father was Guarani, that was a different category. It was extremely complex. The US is so simple, our binary understanding of white and black. So I tried to portray that in my characters, and having, multiracial relationships, because that was the norm. It's nothing about, being woke or progressive. That was the true factual history. Rio in 1808 was multiracial. There were multiracial relationships and families, and many languages spoken. It was a big port city. So that was just the norm. I did not invent that. To try to make it palatable to modern sensibilities. Nope. We have whitewashed history. Rio was already multicultural back then. I was aware when writing that who gets to tell what story, and I was very, very aware that I am a white American, and I was writing a story about Brazilians of color, and so that to me was the balancing act. It is not a story about slavery. It's not a story about Valongo, the slave port, because I don't feel that's my story to tell. But neither did I want to erase it. So I didn't want to tell someone else's story. And really it comes down to profiting. I did not want to profit from some other group's suffering, but I didn't want to erase their suffering. So I made a point. It is a fun historical adventure. If you love Three Musketeers or Pirates of the Caribbean or Princess Bride, this is the book for you. But it does not pretend that slavery doesn't exist. It includes the slave port Valongo. It includes slavery, and it includes racism. I mean, that is there, but that is not the focus of the story.
I love that you have that perspective and that sensitivity to it, because I think that did come through in the book, that slavery really is almost kind of part of the landscape, and several people comment on it, and you see their reactions and kind of their repulsion about it, and even protests against it. But as you say, it's not the focus of the book. But to go to the fun adventure part of it, which it is kind of a balancing act, or I don't know if that's the right way to put it, that you have all of these complex issues, and whether you're talking about race or gender or class, but at the same time, it's a really fun book, which I think is pretty difficult to pull off. But specifically about the fight scenes, how fun was that to write, and how did you do that? If I wanted to write a fight scene, I could never do it, because I just don't have that kind of imagination. Did you do fencing, especially the whip? Mm-hmm. I never really thought that much about the whip as a weapon, the way that Maria uses it, but how did you do that?
So that was the most fun research. That was several mornings of YouTube videos. Thank you, YouTube, because I have not sat on a horse and cracked a whip. That is not something that I have done in my life. I have tried to crack a whip and fail. It is way harder than people on TV make it look. But if you go on YouTube, you can find people with rodeos who do tricks. And so everything Maria does with the whip, I saw people on YouTube doing, they're in rodeos, slicing, actually slicing a soda can in half from 10 feet back, and the bottom half stays put and there's still soda in it, and they just slice the top cleanly off with their whip. Amazing stuff. Also, interestingly, the Israeli Defense Force has a lot of self-defense videos that you can watch for free on YouTube. So a lot of Isabel's dagger fights come from watching Israeli Defense Force training videos on YouTube. So like where she keeps her knives to deploy them, how she holds them, how she flips them, like where she strikes. That's thank you, Israeli Defense Force, for those helpful training videos. And my husband actually fenced. And so he had a fort. So he weighed in a little bit on Victoria's fencing. He was the fencer in the house.
I have to say her character development was really fun to watch because she starts off with this very meek, kind of demure Portuguese servant, and then you see her kind of open up and get more confidence and develop it. Can you talk about the character development? Because Maria and Isabel are such wonderful characters, and I know that's something that really resonated with our book club. Can you tell us where you got the ideas from it for the characters from, and their voices come through so strongly? I'd love to hear more about that.
I love hearing that because I love my girls so much. And so I always love when other people fall in love with them too. Um, so none of the characters are like a one-to-one to someone in real life. I know sometimes authors will inspire directly. But they are pieces of people I know in real life, people I've come across. Um, and of the three, I would say Maria is the most, she's the one that's a thought experiment, really. And what I mean by that is, so I've always thought, I've a woman, I've always been very competitive just by nature and pretty ambitious. And so it occurs to me whenever I'm thinking about history, like, so what did women, or particularly women of color who were ambitious and competitive or entrepreneurial, they've existed throughout time. Like the entrepreneurs come in every gender and every race, and ambitious people come in every race and every gender and every class. And so what do those people do when they're born into a society that will not let them have those traits, or will not let them pursue those traits or ambitions? So I imagined Maria as just this very ambitious woman who she wants to make her own way. She wants to provide for herself. She's very independent. And she is a free Black woman at a time where Black women were not allowed to be ambitious.
Oh,
And so I wondered, I was going to say, so I wonder what that would be like for her. And I would just imagine she must have this ironclad self-discipline. That's what she has to do. She must always be in control of herself just to be safe, to keep her family safe, and just constantly calculating and risk assessing. And so that was how Maria sort of came about. And then Isabel, that was more like, I have 3 younger siblings. And so I just imagine the younger sibling of that person is going to be like, oh, there are no consequences because big sister takes care of everything. And also I wanted, Isabel is the most unlike me of the 3. And she was a little bit inspired by my daughter. Isabel has very, very big emotions. That is not who I am. But I have had to learn to parent someone who just feels things so intensely. And just the roller coaster of emotions is much bigger than my own. And that's just how she is. And so I just imagine Isabel just has really big emotions that sort of keep her very present in the moment. So her arc is sort of learning self-discipline, not to not be emotional, but just not being controlled by them. And then Victoria, who shows up in Brazil and isn't quite as successful as she had imagined she would be, and takes a year sort of just crying in her room. And that wasn't inspired by my own expat journey, moving to a foreign country at all. Like, I don't know. I mean, showing up and being like, I've got this, I'm going to do great at this and this life in this new country. And then finding out it was way harder than you thought, and sort of disappointing yourself for a little while until you make friends.
I think the relationship among the 3 is also really wonderful to watch. Like you said, for Victoria, that really helps her come out of her shell and really feel like she's arrived in Brazil, and to like you said, not just be crying in her room all the time. But also Isabel and Maria, like you were talking about how Isabel has trouble kind of controlling her impulses and her emotions, and it seems like the main thing that does it is her loyalty to her sister that is so strong, the bond between them, that they have such an understanding between them that that was really wonderful to watch. And I also wanted to mention, because you did get a really nice comment. I know you're talking, so you're not able to read it. Let's hear it for women who are ambitious and entrepreneurial, because this really is, I would say, like a feminist book. When you say, like you said, it's like the Three Musketeers, but a feminist version of it, feminist Brazilian version of it, or use, like you said, the tropical Three Musketeers. But I'm looking at the time. I don't want to be respectful of your time, and I just wanted to finish up by asking, well, two questions. One, Maria from our book club wanted to know, how was this book received in Portugal? And I would add also, how is it received in Brazil? And then maybe you can finish by telling us, are you planning a sequel, or what are you working on? I know you mentioned some other works. Are those ones we're going to see published anytime soon?
Okay, so this book has only been published in English in the United States so far. You can buy it through Amazon from anywhere in the world. If you have an Amazon.com account, you can get a Kindle version, or Barnes & Noble. You can get digital copies anywhere. And there are some outlets, like I know I have a friend who ordered the book in Paris from Amazon, and in London. It is possible to get the paperbacks. But it has only been published in the United States with a tiny, tiny publisher so far. So the truth is, we were on sub for about 2 years with this book, and the only publisher who wanted to take a chance on a book set in Brazil was a tiny independent publisher. And so they have published it in the US, and so far it's getting really great reviews. It got a great Kirkus review. And before it got published, I had Brazilian sensitivity readers. So Brazilians have read it, and at this point, former students of mine have read it, and friends from Brazil have read it. But they're getting the English version through Amazon. And they so far love it. My Brazilian sensitivity readers were great. They made the book better. Bárbara, Solene, obrigada. And they were so encouraging, and they thought it was great, and they were so excited. Generally, the attitude in Brazil is, we're so excited Americans are going to read about Brazil. Like that's generally the attitude. Like, wow, they're going to know something about our country. Because they are aware, they know their own history. They know the history. It's fun to see it, but they are not being surprised by any of the history. And they're just so excited that Americans and people outside of Brazil are getting to read about Rio and this really interesting period in Brazilian history. And so if you want the book in Portugal, if you want the book to be published in Portugal, if you think it should be, the best way you can help an author with a small publisher, leave reviews, word of mouth, because we don't have a publicist, we don't have like a budget to sort of promote it internationally. So word of mouth and leaving reviews, like rave reviews for any book with an independent publisher, that is just so, so huge. That's the only way we can compete, is when people read the book, love it, and share it via word of mouth. So hopefully it gets picked up by a Brazilian publisher. I would absolutely love for it to be translated into Portuguese and published in Brazil. And also, sales of this book will help sell the book I currently have on submission right now. I do have a second book that is out with editors, and my agent's trying to sell it. It is another historical fiction. This one is a star-crossed lovers set in Henry Ford's Amazonian rubber plantation. And so in the 1920s, Henry Ford bought a piece of the Amazon the size of Delaware and decided he was going to grow his own rubber. And he tried to build a little Midwestern town in the middle of the Amazon, hired about 5,000 Brazilian workers, and then sit down all American managers. And he created this town called Fordlandia in the middle of the Amazon. And that is where the book I have on sub is set. And it's 1929 to 1930. And needless to say, there were a few challenges. And so it's Joanna, the daughter of the American assistant manager, and Rafael, who is a mechanic at Fordlandia, and it's their story.
Well, I cannot wait to read it. So we will watch out for that. And for everybody who's watching, if you haven't read the book, I really encourage you to go do it. It's a wonderful book, and it's a real page turner. Like you said, it's a fun adventure story. Even if you know nothing about Brazil, you don't need to have any background in order to get caught up in the book. And I can't wait to find out more about the next one. Oh, and I was going to say, just to echo what she said, to please leave a review, because it really does help, and that's how you can help make sure there are more books coming like that soon. So Brynn, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everybody who's watched. If you joined us late, it's going to be up on Instagram in a few minutes, and I'll have it up on the Multicultural Kid Blog's YouTube channel later today. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanna. This was so much fun. It was so nice to meet you and talk to you about the book. Thank you so much.